please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The India Risk Awards management that CNBC TV18 and ICICI Lombard holds every year is an indication of the coming of age of this very important function of risk management for India Inc. And to measure the preparedness of India Inc. in terms of this very important function, we have almost a world-class jury. Clearly, a cross-section of industries were represented. But let me start with you, Mrs. Bhattacharya. What, according to you, was the key function that you looked forward to, the key faculty that you looked forward to as you sat as the chair of this jury awards?
India Inc. actually has done very well on a number of parameters, especially if you look at competitiveness, if you look at adoption of IT, if you look at sustainability adoption. So they've done very well on many, many parameters. In respect of risk also, most companies have already adopted a lot of processes. But I think, where India Inc. Lags a little is in the documentation and the articulation of various aspects of risk management. And what happens if that is the case is that if the processes are not very well ingrained in the company, risk management becomes more person-driven than process-driven. So to the extent that the person at the top is very risk-focused, these processes are honored and they are carried out. If the person at the top is one who doesn't really believe in so much of risk focus, then these processes can become a little weakened. And therefore, it's very important for most companies to, get the articulation down, to get the documentation down, to be more process-focused rather than person-focused. And I think in this award, that is precisely what we were looking for. How much formalization has been done about the risk management processes, and which are the companies that are actually doing it very actively. They are doing it, they are bringing it not only at the board level, but they are walking the talk. They are bringing it right down to the front office level. And that is where I think, we tried to make the distinction. In fact, there were a number of companies who we knew were doing it very well, but because they didn't have these processes, we thought it important that we should award those who did have it.
Nationally, of course, it's good to hear from someone who knows the companies intimately because of your knowledge of their P&Ls. But Mr. Ramakrishnan, internationally, you, of course, have clients, corporate clients outside India. Where would you benchmark Indian companies in the faculty of risk management?
Risk as such definite has sometimes a very negative connotation. You're trying only to manage risk, rather than it also how you balance the risk with opportunity. I think most Indian corporates who have adopted the COSO framework have their best in class in terms of how they manage the entire risk governance process, etc. Because that's an international standard. There is a lot of thinking which has gone into it. But the key is you have the framework, you have the processes, but you can sometimes miss the wood for the trees because there's a whole lot of detail which is there. How do you prioritize which risks you handle, and then what are the mitigation strategies is what is key. And I think that's an evolving journey. That's what I would believe.
Okay, but would you say it's a long way that India Inc. has to go to catch up with the global standards?
No, I wouldn't say so, at least with the large corporates, especially those who have adopted the frameworks which are already well thought out and have been practicing it. I think we would match up with any of the global majors.
Our jury is so rich in international experience that I could ask the same question of you, Mr. Mathur. Do you think, especially in commodity companies where you actually handle, therefore mining, rehabilitation, relocation, is India evolved enough in risk management?
I think India has evolved a lot in the last 5 years. Risk has become a very integral part of business decision making at the executive level. And I think that it gets a significant amount of airtime at board levels in most companies. Over the last 5 years, risk has become very intertwined as the world has become flatter. Whether it's political risk, whether it's currency risk, whether it's commodity price risk, and boundaries are falling. Global, countries are opening up their boundaries to technology, to people, to processes. And it's wonderful right through this award to see how Indian companies have evolved. to compete with the very best. And we had to make some, tough calls right through this exercise. And wonderful to see what Indian companies are doing.
I guess with your experience in Visa, you would have an idea whether financial technologies is going to be, the cutting edge area of risk. Are Indians prepared? I mean, how do you think India is preparing? This is not really a risk as much as, a sunrise area for which we have to prepare. Where do you see India in the international curve?
Definitely better. I'll just give you a perspective, especially in the area of payments where we are coming from. Trust is an integral part of payments, right? And security is paramount to build that trust. And more countries moving into less cash economy and digital push happening. That's extremely important. And we have seen this grown over the years. I've been with this industry for the last 20, 25 years now. The amount of discussion today which is happening at the board level, risk is paramount. Risk is part of the discussions which is happening at the board level, which is heartening to see, and especially even in the discussions which we had in the morning. We could see a framework which is getting evolved. Enterprise risk management was not a framework which was existing probably 5 years or 10 years back. People were managing risk as part of the operational businesses. That's what was evident. But now the framework is getting applicable. We've seen this in other countries as well. Countries are at different stages of evolution, but definitely India is catching up. And we have seen this, especially in the world of payments, people are, especially the BFSI industry, the banking industry, are catching up much faster, probably with other industries, because the risk is extremely paramount.
Okay, before I come to Ramesh, well, Sandeep, legal issues are, a key risk in India because India is also an extremely litigious country. What would be your word of advice to Indian companies?
Legal risk comes with huge cost today. So when we've been all talking about arbitrations, for instance. I've seen arbitrations which run into hundreds of crores in costs.
Okay. Ramesh, I guess the healthcare sector has various kinds of risks. It has policy risk, it has regulatory risk, and it's extremely retail, and to that extent it evokes a lot of emotion. What would be your sense about where India stands with respect to other countries?
So it's a question of evolution in the first instance. We need to categorize this into various buckets. At one level, the distinction between risk and strategy itself is very fine, so to speak. How would you actually classify a foray into China or some other market, or a foray into specialty, so to speak? It's at one level, it's certainly a risky action, really, endeavor, really. To the extent you need to calibrate the risks associated with each of those as well. At an operational level, there are several risks again. There are regulatory risks, and the aftermath of that is very well known. There are risks on, in fact, the research front, because we are battling uncertainties of science when it comes to, in fact, new chemical entities, of that matter, biotechnology and the like. There's a risk, again, on the marketplace itself in terms of intensifying competition, price erosion, and the like. So there are risks at every front, so to speak. Calibrating that is indeed the question. The question, it's also an issue of the top management involvement in that. To what extent is that? And for sure, I think pharmaceutical companies, the top management can't wish away the risks that they face.
For those of us who report on companies for the media, it looks like Indian companies are getting pulled up once too often. Would you say this is true, that Indian companies are getting singled out? Or do you think that this is, it's happening internationally? Other companies, other countries also face the same kind of regulatory hauling up?
There are several parts to it which I'll put in place. Firstly, when it comes to, for example, we have a plant in America, and it's always audited by, in fact, the local wing of the FDA. But there's always a context to it. So there's a bill calling on, in fact, the Jonases of the world out there, and they know the issues around. So to the extent there's a common thread that is. Whilst when it comes to India, there's always a newer team which calls upon the Indian facilities. To the extent the context is indeed lost, that puts a lot more pressure. In a very different sense, it also depends on, in fact, the individuals who come in there, their personal chemistry, the cultural differences, and all of that come into play when it comes to auditing in India. But to be fair, I think the FDA is a very discerning governing body. They're very rational in the way they go about it. And in the end, those who pay a lot of attention to compliance and regulatory issues will certainly come out winners.
Okay. One final word of advice from the chairman of the jury.
Well, I think, next time round, it would be quite interesting to also find out whether the award winners are also actually doing better in the actual business. Because that would give a very clear indicator to industry at large that if you adopt good practices, then the rewards are many. So I think, if we can have some kind of a match-up between the two, then it would be a really rewarding and richer kind of experience.
Okay. Well, point taken, Chairman. The fact that risk is not only for its own sake, but
right.
that it actually also is very rewarding.
Exactly.
In the sense, and risk and reward are not really the opposites that financial world puts it out. Thank you very much, all of you, for participating in the CNBC TV18 and ICICI Lombard Risk Management Awards.